Yeast-free is trying to eliminate that tyramine. Sugar-free is eliminating the inflammation that sugar can bring, and gluten-free is the same. You're eliminating the potential inflammation that can create the environment in your brain that might make you more likely to trigger into a migraine attack.
Welcome to Migraine Again, helping you eat, breathe, survive, thrive, and engage better despite migraine. If you or someone you know struggles with migraine often, join us for today's insightful conversation. Now here's your host, founder and managing editor of MigraineAgain.com and co-host of the Migraine World Summit, Paula Dumas.
Have you tried to change the way you eat due to migraine? Many of us have seen the extensive list of migraine-triggering foods, which is just long enough to bring on a full-blown anxiety attack. And that is not helpful. But if you're curious about all the migraine diets out there, like paleo, ketogenic, yeast-free, gluten-free, sugar-free, and so on, do not miss today's guest. She's a wellness coach and diet expert who also struggles with migraine. She's here to help us sort through the pros and cons of different diets and make it simple to eat well. We'll be back to meet her right after this.
A thief is on the loose, breaking into 1 billion homes around the world like yours. This thief doesn't want your electronics or your jewelry. He wants your work days, your wallet, your relationships, and your most precious moments. On the street, he's known as Migraine. Ever heard of him? Lucky for you, your best defense is one click away at migraineworldsummit.com. Each year, watch 36 world-leading experts, including top patient advocates and headache specialists from the Mayo Clinic, Harvard, UCLA, and King's College London. Get an all-access pass to watch it anytime, anywhere, on demand at migraineworldsummit.com. You'll be glad you did. You're listening to Migraine Again. For show notes and resources from this episode, check out our program page on migraineagain.com. And now, once again, here's your host, Paula Dumas.
Stephanie Weaver is the author of the Migraine Relief Plan, a gentle 8-week transition to better eating, fewer headaches, and optimal health. Stephanie has a master's degree of public health and nutrition education and is also a certified wellness coach. In addition to her extensive training, Stephanie is also a professional wellness speaker, food photographer, recipe developer, and blogger. Stephanie, welcome to Migraine Again.
Thanks so much for having me, Paula.
We are delighted to have you here, and food is one of our favorite topics to dive into. So my migraine was diagnosed at 24 just a few years ago, and shortly after I saw the doctor, I went to this place that we used to call a library. You remember those places?
Yes, I do.
And I went to the library and I checked out a book on migraine diets, and I started my first attempt to control it with food. So your migraine attacks began later in life, which is kind of unusual. What's been your experience with diet in terms of changing your own health?
So I have changed my diet for health reasons, I think 7 or 8 times over the course of my lifetime. I've had issues with allergies. I've gone vegetarian. I went vegan for a while. I ended up going gluten-free. So I have a lot of experience with changing my diet for health reasons. And now that I know what my migraine pattern is, I actually have had migraines my whole life. They were just quite atypical, and so I didn't get diagnosed until I was 53. But I'm pretty sure I had abdominal migraines as a kid, and I know I had what I thought were weather headaches. And even though I saw different doctors and we tried different things, no one ever told me I was having migraines. And because I didn't have aura and they weren't incredibly disabling, I just kind of kept on going with my life. It wasn't until I started having vertigo that I actually got diagnosed.
So it was the vertigo that got you the diagnosis. That's crazy.
Yes, it is crazy. And that was, I think, because post-menopause, my symptoms shifted. And so, of course, we never know because it is an unpredictable condition that we have. But that's my guess is that with my changing hormonal pattern, the migraine started showing up as vertigo. And of course, that was something that I couldn't really ignore. I had to go find out what was going on. But I do have a really strong belief, and I guess it would be a bias, but I think in a good way, that food is an enormous part of our health and our wellness. So that's kind of how I approached this, as well as my doctor. The first thing he did was he gave me the the quote-unquote migraine diet sheet, which is the low tyramine diet. And that was what I went home with. And because I had this background in food and changing recipes, and I've been doing this for a long time, that was my interest as well, was, well, what can I do to help myself feel better? And I think a lot of people like yourself, we want to feel more in control. And so we're looking for answers, and we do eat 3 to 5 or more times a day. So food seems like a natural place to start as well.
Yeah. Some of the doctors that we work with and who I've interviewed for the Migraine World Summit will say, why is food, such a huge part of your content, the Eat channel on Migraine Again? And I said, because we kind of think that food can be medicine, and it can be a big contributor to your wellness or how you feel, negative or positive. And it seems like many of the people in our community have the same orientation to that. Not everybody does, but many of them believe that food is a choice that is within their control every day.
Absolutely.
And so learning to make better choices will, in the long run, pay out. So, now, what made you want to empower others using diet as a catalyst for this kind of positive change in their health?
So I have a master's of public health, as you mentioned, in nutrition education. And so I've always been interested in nutrition. I started my food blog a little over 7 years ago to try to help people who had to be on special diets for health reasons feel like they had great choices, so that it wasn't about want and lack and, oh, this isn't as good as. I really, food can be, if you're creative, food can be an amazing part of your life. And even if you're gluten-free or you're not eating sugar or you choose to go completely plant-based, you shouldn't have to feel like, wow, I'm eating less than other people. So it was a natural place for me to come in. So I came in with that mindset. I was working on my food blog. I was developing recipes. I'm given this diet list. And so, of course, I'm going to start researching. But even though I'm not a registered dietitian, but I have a lot of nutrition background, and I'd never heard of tyramine, which is an amino acid breakdown product. So tyrosine is the amino acid. It's a naturally occurring substance in food. I'd actually never heard of it. And apparently this was what was causing my migraines, according to this 3-page handout, which, of course, we know is not true. There's many things that cause migraine, but that was kind of where I started. And then as soon as I started looking into it, I realized, wow, there's a whole lot of not information that's available. There's conflicting information. There's every list I looked at was different. And so I was very confused. And but I kept working at it because I did feel like, I've seen good results in the past when I had chronic fatigue syndrome and I really shifted my diet. That really helped me. So I knew that there could be a potential shift. I wasn't expecting to cure myself or anything like that, and I certainly don't promise that to anyone. But I definitely have that bias. And I think some MDs have that bias and some don't. So you kind of mentioned that earlier. If you talk to integrative medicine doctors, functional medicine doctors, they're all about diet and lifestyle, whereas the allopathic doctors that haven't gone into that level of training maybe, they don't necessarily have that perspective.
Most doctors get no nutrition training in med school.
Correct.
So that's their orientation, nor in continuing education.
Right, because they're choosing to keep up their continuing medical education hours in neurology or whatever their specialty is, and I totally understand that. But we sort of expect that they're going to know more about this than they actually do, and so that's something that people should be aware of, is that maybe your doctor doesn't know that much about nutrition. Mine said to me, I want you to tell me everything you're learning because you already probably know more than I do, and I want you to fill me in. And so that was a great partnership for me.
That is good. That's great that he or she was humble enough to welcome that from you.
Yes, it was awesome.
I've tried a few diets to control my migraine attacks. I did 5 weeks on a yeast-free diet. That was the first one I tried. Felt amazing. It was incredibly effective until it stopped working. And then I tried eliminating all the trigger foods in the Heal Your Headache book with no relief. I tried 2 years of going gluten-free, which helped my digestion really well, but it didn't change the frequency or intensity of my migraine attacks. And then finally, I tried tracking my triggers using an app called Curelator for 90 days, and I removed the offending foods. And that really helped me make some progress. Curiously, one of the things that I identified was that when I consumed tyramines, it was actually a helpful thing instead of what many people experience, which is that tyramines are a negative thing. So that's just another way of seeing how each of us are very, very different. So
That's fascinating.
It is fascinating. What does the evidence say about using diet to help improve health conditions such as migraine?
So as you that was an awesome overview of the challenges of diet and a condition like migraine, which is unpredictable and it has multiple factors, right? So we know it's a neurobiological condition. There's a number of theories. Sometimes they seem to go in and out of favor. For a while, I think people really focused on food triggers and that food was a big piece of it. Now, we were both just at the American Headache Society, and I kind of felt like the pendulum had swung away from that, and people were saying, triggers are really all about the prodrome, and you're not really actually causing the migraine. It's actually already started, and you just have a food craving. And that's entirely possible. Like, we don't know because we just do not know. So what I can say is that when I looked into the diet sheet that I was given, I could not find how it was developed. And I did a lot of research. I contacted every organization that had a diet sheet on their website, and no one could tell me where the list came from or what research it was based upon. And so I think that so that's that's a question mark, is where did that come from, and then how is it developed? There have been a few studies related to diet and migraine. Usually they're pretty small. So there was one in Turkey that was 30 subjects. And what they actually did, which was very interesting, was they tested them for food allergies. And then they would have a period of time where they were told not to eat certain foods, and then they would switch over. And nobody knew, the doctors didn't know, and the patients didn't know what foods they actually had tested allergic to. And of course, everybody tested allergic to different foods. Mm-hmm. So this is, I think, what's so fascinating and challenging about this is that every one of us is different, right? So for what may work for you, like eating avocados, is not going to be helpful for someone else. And that's, I think, where the frustration comes in of how do we figure this out in a way that doesn't make us completely nuts. Then you have the numbers of a study on the low-fat vegan diet that Center for Science of the Public Interest did show a little bit of improvement. But when I talked to the principal investigator on that study, I felt that there was certainly there was bias going in because that's their position, that everybody should be on a low-fat vegan diet. And I'm not criticizing that, but we all have to understand that there's always going to be bias within the researchers, right? They're trying to prove something they already think might be the case. And then there's the one thing I wanted to talk about is there's the anecdotal evidence, which is your personal experience or a person's personal experience. You found that avocados actually helped you, and you did that in a really systematic way. It might be problematic, though, if you then put on your website, hey, avocados are the cure for migraines, because they may not be helpful for everyone. And so that's what I would call anecdotal evidence, like one person or a couple people. Then there's clinical practice, and I think that you mentioned the Heal Your Headache book, which is the best-selling headache book on Amazon. So a lot of people have bought it and read it and tried it. And my guess is that as many people found it helpful as didn't find it helpful, right, because we're all so different. But what is interesting about his dietary list is that it was worked on over the course of 30 years of his clinical practice with patients. And so for me, even though it's not a scientific study, that's valuable, right? He worked with patients over 30 years and developed this list and took some things off and put some things on based on what his patients were telling him. So even though there's other things in this book that are problematic and there's people hate his book, love his book, whatever, I think that the value of that 30 years of clinical practice is an interesting piece for people to understand. And then the third thing would be a randomized scientific trial where you have a bunch of people and they're randomized into two groups and they test one type of diet perhaps, and then the other people don't have that and maybe they switch them. And it's very expensive to do. It's very hard to do. And it's tough because just imagine, unless you're going to send meal kits to everyone and they're never going to stray from what you're giving them. I mean, it's very expensive to do dietary work. And I worked on a study when I first got out of public health school, and even just getting people to register how much of a particular food they ate is really hard. So I don't think we're ever going to have a definitive dietary study. I really wish we did. I would love to have someone have done that, and then I wouldn't have had to write a book and would have said, okay, this is the way to go. But what I found was that at least having a systematic approach to trying food, I think, is helpful. And then we do know, based on population studies, that certain kinds of ways of eating are helpful. So we know that the standard American diet, which is very high in processed foods and packaged foods, has been problematic for people for a long time. And every time it's introduced somewhere to a new population, you start to see, increases in obesity and diabetes and some other issues. So we do know that. We do know that people that eat the Mediterranean-style diet seem to have better health outcomes overall. And there's, blue zones. There's 5 blue zones around the world that are very much very health-oriented places where people live a really long time and seem to have lower incidence of some of these illnesses. And they tend to eat all whole foods, primarily plant-based, a small amount of animal protein, and then there's other factors involved as well. So we do know some kind of broad strokes things about nutrition. The challenge is that we don't have any really great studies that definitively prove one way or another what kind of food you can eat to prevent a migraine.
Yeah, the evidence is a little bit thin, and so your own personal trial and error is probably the best approach. And giving it enough time, I suppose, to make sure that it works is really, really key. So thanks for that kind of wrap up on the evidence. We'll talk about some of the specific diets a little bit later. There's been a lot of buzz about salt as a treatment for migraine on social media. So based on the evidence that you've seen, is salt good or bad for people with migraine?
So that's an interesting question because I would, first of all, encourage people to take a look at how that information is being presented. Is it in a little, a graphic that's being shared on social media that says migraine cure and, all you have to do is, then I would say, I'm going to be very wary of that information. If it's a research study or a registered dietitian who's talking about it, that's a different kind of piece of information that someone might weigh. I know for myself, because I have vertigo and dizziness symptoms, I have to be very careful about my sodium intake. And so my book, all the rest in my book, are salt-free. They're very high flavor, so they're designed to be eaten without salt and taste fantastic. Mm-hmm. And then I encourage people to add salt at the table to the level that it tastes good to them. So if you are having any kind of vertigo or dizziness symptoms, I don't recommend being a heavy salt user. That would be something to discuss with your doctor or nutritionist. I'm on a diuretic, so I also have to watch that, and I have to watch my potassium intake. I think that there are some studies being done linking high intake of white processed salt in those types of foods with autoimmune conditions. And there are some people that think that migraine has an autoimmune component. So that is interesting to me because I think all this stuff is connected. And so I'm looking at that and saying, there's yet another reason to stay off of processed and packaged foods, right? Because maybe it's contributing to autoimmune symptoms that might be problematic for me. So I would say that it's one of those things that if somebody's saying it's a cure, we know there's not a cure for migraine. So I would kind of take that with a grain of salt, pun intended. But if you're not someone who has a particular aspect that might be really sensitive to sodium, I don't think you need to worry about it. But I wouldn't expect that, drinking a glass of water with a half a teaspoon of salt every morning is going to really impact your migraines. It could, because maybe you're that person that it does, but I don't see the evidence for it.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. Well, you're listening to Migraine Again, and our guest is Stephanie Weaver, author of the Migraine Relief Plan. We're going to ask her about sugar, willpower, and specific diets when we return.
Feel like you've tried absolutely everything for your migraine attacks without getting relief? Don't be discouraged. There's hope one click away on the migraineworldsummit.com website. Each year, we present conversations with 36 world-leading experts discussing the latest migraine treatments. Board-certified headache specialists from the Mayo Clinic, Harvard Medical School, Stanford, UCLA, and King's College London offering insights to help you make real progress. You can also get our exclusive migraine treatment directory of over 250 different migraine therapies that people just like you are using today. Get an all-access pass to watch it anytime, anywhere, on demand at migraineworldsummit.com. You'll be glad you did. This is Migraine Again, encouraging and empowering you in your battle against migraine because you deserve to feel better. You can hear this conversation again or share it with someone who might like to hear it by going to migraineagain.com. Now, once again, here's Paula.
And we're back with health coach Stephanie Weaver to talk about choosing a migraine diet and sticking to it. And before we dive into that, Stephanie, I wanted to pick up on, we were talking about packaged food ingredients and how salt is oftentimes embedded in a lot of packaged foods, but so is sugar. And one of the interesting findings that I had as I began to dig into this was that reactive hypoglycemia is one of those sneaky, unknown migraine triggers. What advice can you offer to someone with migraine who also happens to have a sweet tooth or frequent carb cravings?
Sure. So I am one of those people. I love sweet foods, so I am not some saint. I kind of struggle with sugar really my whole life, and it's something where I am completely sympathetic if it's something you feel really strongly attracted to. There's some people I know that don't really care if they ever eat sugar again. I am not one of those people. So just to be clear about that. I do recommend, because pretty much all of the books and everybody, all the experts do recommend keeping your blood sugar at an even level. So what does that mean? That means eating, can be 3 decent-sized meals in the day, or it can be, 3 meals and 2 snacks, but just not skipping a lot of meals, not, fasting and then all of a sudden eating something really sugary because you are going to have that crash, and that is a known migraine trigger. So we definitely want to avoid that. And that's a place where, like we were earlier, we were talking about feeling in control. These are the things that we actually can do that do make a difference, right? So that's something that I would encourage people to just kind of think about. You also want to be eating whole foods. And what do I mean by that? Things that are kind of look like when they came out of the ground, or what your grandmother or great-grandmother would have recognized in her grocery store. So not things in packages, not things that have been broken down. So, whole grain flour, whole grains, if you're eating grains, eating whole beans, and lots of vegetables, because that helps slow, and a good dose of healthy fat, because that slows the absorption into your system, so you don't have that peak and that crash that can then be a migraine trigger.
So if you're going to eat something sweet, be sure to eat it with other whole grains or whole foods that will even out your blood sugar?
Well, what I recommend is, fruit versus something that's made from sugar. So you can certainly have sweet things, but, maybe apple with a slice of cheese, if you can eat cheese, or a little bit of healthy fat, sunflower seed butter with apple slice would be a great example of, it's got some sweetness, but it also has some healthy fat, and it's going to be slowly absorbed into your system. I do have desserts in my book, but they are what I call fruit forward. So they use the natural sweetness of fruit with just a small amount of stevia or another sweetener if you don't care for stevia, to make it sort of dessert level. So I don't expect people to not eat dessert, but to just kind of, I think one of the things that you learn is if you start reading packages that literally sugar is in every packaged food, even things that are savory. And it's shocking when you start reading the labels and knowing, I have a list of all the names of sugar in my book, that it's, labeled under all different kinds of things. And once you kind of get away from those foods, your palate adjusts, and you actually can taste the sweetness in a carrot or a cherry tomato in a way that you didn't before, because our palate, it's kind of becomes dull to that, because it's constantly, if you're eating those processed foods that are high salt, high fat, high sugar, we can't really taste the natural sweetness of food. So it's kind of a slow process, but that's what I advocate, is gradually getting off of these things and replacing them with those naturally sweet foods.
Well, that takes a ton of willpower, right? So as a wellness coach, how do you help your clients gain the willpower to stay on a diet?
Well, first of all, I don't think of what I do as a diet, and I don't use the word diet in my book. I think that if you talk to, a registered dietitian, a diet is just what someone eats in a day. That's all it is. It's a completely neutral word. But in our culture, it's a very loaded, mostly negative word that people think of as, I'm going on this diet and eventually I will be off this diet. So it's not about making a lifestyle change, which is what I think is required of us if we want to feel as well as possible. So in terms of sugar cravings, I can tell you that if you're eating sugar and you decide you're going to stop, you will have cravings for about 3 days, and on day 4, they do go away. So I've done this enough times to be able to say, I just have to tough it out for 3 days, and then they will go away. So that's one little piece of it. As a health coach, I work with people to meet the goals that they themselves are wanting to do. And so we usually start with very small, achievable things. And, the thing is, it's sort of a virtuous cycle, right? If you start to lose a little bit of weight or your migraines start to lessen a little bit, then you feel a little better, then you're a little bit more motivated, and it kind of feeds that. So, for example, if during the sort of November to December holiday period, that's just a sugar mania, right? Every catalog that shows up in your mailbox has got all this amazing food, and it's a very tough time for people to resist those things. And I don't believe in completely giving up everything. So I have a whole chapter in my book called Planning to Fail that helps you make decisions about which of those things do I want to do? Which choices are going to be most helpful for me versus unhelpful for me? I am going to go to this party and I am going to just enjoy the spread, but maybe I'm going to eat really lightly that morning, or I'm going to be really thoughtful about my blood sugar level. And then, when January comes around, often people are very much interested in kind of cleansing or everything. And so maybe we do have a little bit more of that sense of willpower. But what I've learned is that if people just work on a gradual basis on very small, achievable goals, they do start to build that sense of willpower and they start feeling better. And then then that sort of feeds the desire to continue on.
Yeah, you get the rewards and therefore you continue the behavior. Makes perfect sense. So let's talk about some of the popular diets that people are trying for migraine these days. If you can briefly define these for us and then share some of the main pros and cons. Again, briefly, not in great depth, but Let's start with paleo.
Paleo is an approach based on an ancestral pattern looking at before people had agriculture. So it's no grains, no beans, meat, vegetables, wild-caught fish. And there is a book called The Migraine Miracle. It didn't actually work for me, so it may not be a miracle for everyone, but it's certainly worth looking into because of the whole foods approach. Okay.
And so are there any cons? I can understand the pros for paleo. Are there any cons for paleo?
The critique is that you're missing nutrients from the grains and the beans, and that's a valid critique. I think that you can certainly, if you're eating a well-rounded paleo diet, I don't think that those nutrients are an issue, but not everyone agrees with me on that either.
Okay. I know 3 people who are on a ketogenic diet right now for migraine. What are the pros and cons of it? And explain what it is for everybody.
So ketogenic diet is eating a very high fat percentage, very low carbohydrate. So if you are ever following, it's basically 40 to 60 grams of carbs in your diet daily, which essentially means you're not eating any beans, any grains, or any starchy vegetables. You're eating extra fat, so like extra coconut oil or extra avocados. You're eating lean meats or fatty meats is fine. And then you're eating just a ton of vegetables. So Terry Walls, who has done a ton of work in the multiple sclerosis arena, and David Perlmutter and Dr. Mark Hyman, they're all proponents of versions of the ketogenic diet. Mm-hmm. The challenge with ketogenic is it's very hard to stay on it for a long period of time. It's super restrictive. I think Terry Walls' third phase in her book is the most nutritionally balanced. I don't recommend people do it without being supervised by a nutritionist because there are issues if people aren't being supervised just because the nutrient density can be a problem for people.
Right. One of them had to go off of it because his liver enzymes or something went very high. So
Yeah, you can get non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is essentially cirrhosis of the liver without drinking. So that's one of the challenges is I don't know that it's a long-term approach, and that's why I don't recommend people do it unless they're being supervised.
Maybe as a reset. Real quick, yeast-free, sugar-free, gluten-free.
Yeah, so yeast-free is trying to eliminate that tyramine. Sugar-free is eliminating the inflammation that sugar can bring, and gluten-free is the same. You're eliminating the potential inflammation that can create the environment in your brain that might make you more likely to trigger into a migraine attack. Not everyone agrees with these. I've got doctors that have told me my book talks too much about gluten, and other doctors have told me my book, I allow too many grains. So it just depends on who you talk to. But what I did with my book is I took kind of the best of all this information, and I laid it out in a way that would help. It helped me to understand my migraine pattern better, and it would allow people to determine what their triggers are and also eat delicious food because there's 75 recipes that are super tasty.
We are all into delicious food.
Yeah.
So based on your experience, if someone with migraine feels like they've tried every diet and nothing has worked, are there any mistakes that we might be making?
Well, not everyone has a response to food. So if you feel like you've genuinely tried everything, then it may be that my guess is, and I don't know that we'll ever know this, is about 30 to 40% of people have some kind of food response. I would say that it's worth it to have some allergy testing done because I found out I had a latent allergy to both eggs and dairy, which I was eating. And it's helpful to get those out of your system so, again, they're not inflammatory. And then, I provide a systematic approach to doing this, which is basically what you described you kind of did yourself. What I provided in my book was what I found worked for me and the people that tested my program as I was developing it, provides a structure for people to, if they really have a sense that, I really do feel like food is an issue or I do want to start eating better. I feel like I want to eat more whole foods or I want to eat more anti-inflammatory. That's what my book provides for people.
Good. And I definitely want to try some of the recipes in there. What maybe 3 or 4 recipes that I should definitely try from your book?
The creamy Nutella carrot butter is essentially like Nutella but healthy, and everybody loves it. The spicy kale and Swiss chard sauté, which is on the cover in the cover photograph, makes lovers out of kale. People who think they hate kale and Swiss chard. It's very tasty and rich and has a lovely texture. And then there's the maple sesame glazed chicken, which is also on the cover. It kind of has a teriyaki type flavor without any soy or other issues. And the other thing that I provide is that if you're a believer in food triggers, every single recipe is completely trigger-free. So there is no other book like that. And so that was something that was important to me to provide for people.
Fantastic. So how can having diet restrictions feel empowering instead of limiting?
Well, again, I talk a lot about language in the book. And I think if you feel like you're on a restricted diet, you're going to be on an unhappy camper and you're not going to last very long. I look at this as a way to feel my best and to be a really healthy person who happens to get migraines. And so the way that I eat, I feel provides that freedom because I went from 3 to 5 migraine days a week and a daily headache to 1 to 3 migraine days a month and no daily headache. So for me, I got my life back. And that is incredibly freeing. So that's how I think of it. I think of the food as just being part of my medicine that I take.
I absolutely agree. And I thank you so much, Stephanie, for your passion to educate other people about how food can empower you to have a healthier and happier life. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Paula.
Great. It's been fun. And if you'd like to connect with Stephanie, check out her Facebook page, Stephanie Weaver MPH. And you can get a copy of her new book, The Migraine Relief Plan, through a link in the show notes on migraineagain.com. By the way, if you've really enjoyed this show so far, can I ask you a favor? We really value your feedback and reviews. Can you take a minute to give us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts? It would mean so much to us, and it helps us do more quality programs like this one. Next, we're going to return with a listener question of the day on whether it's worth it to join a clinical trial.
Feel like you've tried absolutely everything for your migraine attacks without getting relief? Don't be discouraged. There's hope one click away on the migraineworldsummit.com website. Each year, we present conversations with 36 world-leading experts discussing the latest migraine treatments. Board-certified headache specialists from the Mayo Clinic, Harvard Medical School, Stanford, UCLA, and King's College London, offering insights to help you make real progress. You can also get our exclusive migraine treatment directory of over 250 different migraine therapies that people just like you are using today. Get an all-access pass to watch it anytime, anywhere, on demand at migraineworldsummit.com. You'll be glad you did. Hey, we'd like to hear about your life with migraine and offer some help and encouragement if we can. If you've got a question about migraine, we'll do our best to answer it and might even include it on one of our upcoming podcasts. If you'd like to submit a question, just go to our website, migraineagain.com/question. And Paula, today we hear from Shelley in Palo Alto, California, who writes, I'd really like to take part in a clinical trial, but I'm really nervous about it. Is it really worth it? And if so, what do I need to know?
Oh, great question, Shelley. And, a lot of people see these ads for participating in a clinical trial and you think, oh, my goodness, should I do that? Because
they offer so many great things, like, all of your costs will be covered.
All of your costs will be covered, your time, your travel, all of those things. And it's really great for a couple of types of people. Those who have lost hope, that they feel like they've tried everything. If that might be you, then it might be good for you. Those who want to contribute to the community in some meaningful way. Maybe you can't give because you're financially strapped, but you have time and you can invest your time to help grow the migraine community. This is a really important thing to do. And also those who are feeling like the treatment that they're using, the therapy that they're using just isn't helping at all. And they're on a quest to find something new and better for you. All of those are good reasons to get involved in a clinical trial. And there are hundreds going on. Right now, over 100 migraine clinical trials this year alone. Because there's a huge surge in scientific breakthroughs for migraine. New medications, new devices, new alternative therapies, more than in the last 2 decades. So it's a good time to get engaged. And whenever you see us reference something on migraineagain.com about PubMed or a medical journal like neurology or cephalalgia, those are all based on clinical trials. It's evidence that's coming out of these trials. So we really rely upon that to get good evidence on what's going to help people and what will not. So if you want to be a part of that, there's no cost to you to qualify, to participate if you qualify, except for your time. Interestingly, not all of the trials that are out there are medication-based. Some of them are. But there are trials for weight loss, for acupuncture, for vitamins, for devices, behavioral therapies, some natural therapies. There's all kinds of things that are being researched by different hospitals and universities right now. So all of those have the potential to really help us as patients. There are some hidden benefits and hidden costs in participating in a clinical trial. If you may or may not get the treatment, you might be in the control arm that gets the sugar pill, the placebo, or the fake stimulation of some type, or you might get the real thing. And so you might get no benefit at all out of the therapy if it either doesn't work or you're in the control arm that's not getting anything. So don't expect that if it doesn't work for you, it's automatically a failed trial. You were an important part of that trial if it didn't work for you. Then there are some hidden benefits. Not only are you providing new options for therapy for the community, you've saved us from some ineffective or expensive therapies that shouldn't ever come to market. So both of those are really, really big benefits. And so I'd say a big thank you to all of you who have participated in a clinical trial, because they're really, really important for us to be able to make progress. It's what I call a win-win-win-win-win all the way around. So if you're interested in this, there is a clinical trial registry on our website, and we'll provide a link to the article that helps you learn more about it and sign up for that. It's called New Migraine Clinical Trials, Hope for the Hopeless, and we hope that you'll check it out.
Paula, I think it's always worth mentioning in times like this, don't enter into a clinical trial of any sort without first consulting with your existing doctor, because you want to make sure that everybody has the information they need in order to move forward safely in this.
Absolutely. A great point, because the clinical trial is not going to be run by your doctor unless you're going to a world-class headache center, which is where a lot of them are facilitated. And so your day-to-day doctor needs to know what you're doing, because you might not be the best candidate for this. And if the trial requires that you suspend your current therapy and your local doctor does not believe that that's the best thing for you, don't do it. Don't do it. It's not worth it.
Yeah. Excellent advice. Thanks, Paula.
Yeah. Thank you. And that wraps it up for today. I'm Paula Dumas, wishing you a pain-free day.
Thanks for spending part of your day with us. We hope that you feel encouraged and empowered in your battle against migraine, because you deserve better. If you want to suffer less and live more despite migraine, be sure to check out all the great resources on migraineagain.com. Follow us on your favorite social network and subscribe to our free newsletter and this program. If you enjoyed today's episode, tell a friend about it, and be sure and join us again next time on Migraine Again. You'll be glad you did.